Mr. President.
The senator from Utah.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a little bit like deja vu all over again. Here we are dealing with another piece of legislation. Now, it's an important piece of legislation. It's a piece of legislation that deals with a lot of things important to a lot of Americans, affecting something that is uniquely, distinctively within our legislative jurisdiction as federal lawmakers. That is the work of the Federal Aviation Administration. It's part of an interstate network since the dawn of the Republic. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, the Commerce Clause, has been interpreted, among other things, to give Congress regulatory legislative jurisdiction over channels and instrumentalities of interstate commerce, and air travel happens to be one of those things. So this important FAA reauthorization bill that has a lot of provisions in it, some of which I like, some of which I'm not wild about, was processed by the Senate Commerce Committee. The Commerce Committee, the chair and especially the ranking member, did yeoman's work in incorporating into the base text amendments from a wide array of members, and I've appreciated the hard work that they have put into it. It is important to remember that no matter how hard a committee chair and ranking member work, as certainly the ranking member, my friend and colleague, the distinguished senator from Texas, have done in this case, on this bill, it still doesn't obviate or supplant the need for a robust consideration of amendments to be offered on the Senate floor. Because remember, any one Senate committee, including the Commerce Committee, contains at most, a few dozen members of this body. A couple of dozen is about all. And there are, of course, 100 of us. Every one of us hold an election certificate. And one of the most fundamental rules in the Constitution, a rule that by directive of the Constitution itself can't be changed, is the principle of equal representation among the states in the Senate. So to give life and vitality to that, it's absolutely imperative that individual senators be given the opportunity to have meaningful input into legislation, whether they sit on the Committee of Jurisdiction or not. To that end, Mr. President, throughout the nearly 2.5 centuries of the existence of this body, the United States Senate, our rules have given pretty broad deference to individual members and given certain prerogatives to each and every senator, no matter how junior or how senior, whether each member is with the minority party or with the majority party. And the whole basis of traditions in the Senate built into our rules with things like the filibuster, like the cloture standard, they're all designed to allow members to engage in robust debate. You can't really have meaningful debate and meaningful input from every member of this body who wants to participate unless you have something of an open amendment process on the floor. Now, this was always the norm in the history of the Senate. It was even when I arrived here and was sworn into office at the beginning of 2011. The presiding officer, of course, joined us not too long after that, and thus commenced the golden era of the United States Senate with the arrival of the current presiding officer. But when we arrived here in the Senate, there were still real, live, significant vestiges of the way the place had always operated. Namely, when we had a significant bill, especially a significant must-pass legislative vehicle like the FAA reauthorization bill we're considering now, it was still normal, still to be expected, that an individual senator could come down to the Senate floor, call up his or her amendment, and make that amendment pending. Once an amendment is made pending, then the Senate has an obligation eventually to dispose of that amendment, either by passing it or voting on it and declining to pass it or tabling it or something like that. There are not many options, but it had to be disposed of once it was made pending. We've gotten into a bad pattern since then, and unfortunately both political parties have played a role in this, but we've had an increased prevalence of a situation in which the majority leader will come to the Senate floor, file cloture on the bill to bring debate to a close, and set that process for bringing debate to a close in motion, and fill the tree. Fill the tree. Filling the amendment tree is what that refers to. That's a fancy Senate terminology that just means the majority leader has some tricks at his disposal to make it nearly impossible to get amendments made pending by individual rank and file members. It was fairly common that we could make our amendments pending as recently as 2011, 2012, when I arrived, and then when the presiding officer arrived in the Senate. It's almost unheard of now, because filing cloture and filling the tree have become almost automatic, almost reflexive. They're almost self-perpetuating. And it's relentless to the point that many members who have joined us since then haven't ever even really experienced the Senate the way that is more properly expected to function, where individual members have to beg and plead, go on bended knee to the political leaders of both parties in the Senate, asking, please, please, may I have a chance to do this? And without the acquiescence of the majority leader, the only way you can get your amendment pending in many circumstances involves coming to the floor and asking unanimous consent to make it pending. That consent is too routinely denied now, very often by the majority party, typically by the majority party, sometimes not. And what that results in is really a truncation, an abbreviation, short-circuiting of the legislative process as it's always functioned here, as it was designed to function in the Senate rules, as I imagine it to have been envisioned by the Founding Fathers. And as a result, look, there are 100 members of this body, and they should all have the opportunity to fight publicly for their constituents, to make improvements to the bill, to take away things they consider harmful, to add things that have not been included that they think should be included. This bill has not been amended on the Senate floor. That's why I opposed cloture moments ago. And like I say, there are some things in this bill that I really like. There are other things that I don't like. But the biggest single reason to oppose cloture on the bill is that I don't know how you can, in good conscience, vote to bring debate to a close when the debate has effectively not happened, at least not on the Senate floor. And I don't believe debate can happen meaningfully, effectively, on an amendable vehicle like this one, where there's been no opportunity to amend. The bill hasn't been amended on the Senate floor. The Senate shouldn't simply agree to rubber stamp the so-called Four Corners Agreement. Four Corners Agreement, that term can refer to several different things. Very often it means that it's been blessed, depending on the nature of the bill, very often it's been blessed by the law firm of Schumer, McConnell, Johnson, and Jeffries. Or perhaps the law firm of Schumer, McConnell, Johnson, and Jeffries, accompanied by the chair and ranking member of the appropriate legislative committee or committees. But we're not a rubber stamp for one or more committees or for the firm. We are each elected by the voters in our respective states, should stand accountable to them. And in order to do our jobs, we've got to stand here and be willing to debate. If you don't want to fight fires, for heaven's sakes, don't become a firefighter. And if you don't want to cast votes, including lots of votes on amendments to legislation, even where you don't feel like taking the vote, even where you'd rather be kicking back, drinking a root beer or something, you'd be really doing your constituents a disservice if you subjugated your own desires, your own desire for bliss and for inaction, and you preferred those over your duty to your constituents who elected you. So we're not here to celebrate somebody's birthday. We're not here to rubber stamp what the committees do or what the law firm suggests. We are here to legislate. We're not really legislators. We are a gigantic rubber stamp to the extent that we ourselves don't have the opportunity to vote for amendments. And so that's why I call upon all senators within the sound of my voice Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or something else, a liberal or a conservative, whether you've been here a few years or for a really long time, it doesn't matter. You should want your job that you worked really hard to get elected to. You should want to be able to do your job. I want to be clear. There are a lot of the amendments that have been prominently featured and touted in connection with this bill. Amendments, sponsors of which have really aggressively argued for. A lot of those amendments are not amendments that I support. In fact, a number of them are things that I strongly oppose and would really hope would not pass. Some of them I'd support, others I wouldn't. But notwithstanding the fact that some of them really are awful, call me old-fashioned, Mr. President, but I think that's our job, is to take votes, to try to make legislation better and to offer improvements to it, and that means amendments. Look, I understand, in the House of Representatives, things operate a little bit differently. You've got 435 people over there. It's a lot harder to have that. This is why we've always bragged about our status as the world's greatest deliberative legislative body. On paper, we are. Historically, we certainly have been. Today, we are not. And we're kidding ourselves. We're delusional if we want and expect the American people to believe otherwise, because we're not that. But here's the good news, Mr. President. We still are that entity on paper. We still are that entity as it's envisioned, as it's created, as it's established and outlined by the Constitution. We still are that entity with our own rules, our own precedents, and our own customs. But alas, the best rules, the best constitutional provisions will amount to dead letter if we ourselves refuse to exercise our own rights and our prerogatives. The muscle of legislative procedure begins to atrophy with non-use, especially deliberate, willful, chronic non-use, always ultimately to the benefit of the firm, to the benefit of a small handful of senators, and to the exclusion, to the effective disenfranchisement of everyone else. Most importantly, those who elected us to do a job that we're neglecting, that we're outsourcing to third parties, sometimes third parties in the executive branch of government, sometimes it's individual senators within our own ranks, within our own body, our own party leaders within our respective legislative chambers. Mr. President, here's my closing plea. I hope and I humbly ask my senators, and I have great affection for the presiding officer and consider him a dear friend. And even though he and I don't agree on every political issue, we have different positions on everything from the consumption of meat to whether I waited too long to shave my head. But the presiding officer and I are good friends, and even though we have different ideas on a lot of things, I think we both agree on the fact that the Senate could do a better job and would be doing a better job if we were voting more on his amendments, more on my amendments, more on the amendments of anyone else wants to file. Sure, it takes a little bit more time, perhaps. Sure, it requires a little bit of effort, but that way we're doing our job. And not everything we want will always pass. And yeah, that way the law firm of Schumer, McConnell, Johnson, and Jeffries wouldn't be able to control as much as it does. But it was never intended to be that way. We're intended to make laws, not other lawmakers. Certainly not legislative oligarchs who stand in for everybody else while the muscle of legislative and constitutional procedure continues to atrophy. So in short, the next Senate Republican and Democratic leader, regardless of who holds the majority, I hope, including and especially the next majority leader of either political party, I certainly hope he or she, whoever holds that position, will plot out a course that is different than the one that we've been on for the last few years, and plot out a course that allows and encourages and enables each and every senator to do his or her job. We're all going to work better if everyone is allowed to do his or her job. And that means the leader needs to stop filling the tree reflexively, consistently, instinctively every time, and boxing out rank and file members. Now, look, I get it. There are times when the majority party may see fit to do that, and those decisions have to be made in real time. But I don't think it should be done often. I don't think it should be done for light or transient reasons. It should be the rare exception rather than the norm. But regardless of who the next majority leader is, and to which party that leader may belong, it's not as though we are hopeless, passive observers, subjects to be acted upon here. No, we can be part of this process. Wherever, whenever there is an effort to lock out amendments, to fill the tree, and exclude individual rank-and-file members from the amendment process, any 41 senators, Republicans, Democrats, or a combination of the two, can respond to that by opposing cloture and prohibiting the process from resulting in bringing debate to a close unless or until each senator is allowed the opportunity to offer, call up, and make pending their amendments. Thank you, Mr. President. I have the floor and note the absence of a quorum.